You're listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to the third episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me today are Jeff Ranke and Anna Wells. We're editors for Manufacturing.net and Industrial Equipment News, and each have about 15 years of experience covering the manufacturing industry. On today's podcast, we cover the 5 biggest stories in manufacturing and the implications they have on the industry moving forward. First, a little bit of housekeeping. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. And to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, Anna, or David at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. And please send us notes, not pitches. We get plenty of those. How are you guys doing today?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Anna?
Good. Let's stop with the housekeeping. Let's trash this hotel room.
Nice. I miss hotels. Trashed or not, it's been so long since I've smeared buffalo sauce on a sheet. Anyway, let's jump right into things. Our first story this week is why the power grid failed in Texas and beyond. The story is Texas has been hit with a cold snap, and a lack of preparation has left more than 3 million Texans vulnerable after losing power. Basically, it got cold in Texas. Not historically, but cold, and residents turned up their heaters, including inefficient electric units. Demand spiked to levels on par with the hottest summer days, but the state didn't have the capacity to keep up. The state can generate about 67,000 megawatts in the winter. In the summer, it's about 86,000 megawatts. Typically, these power plants go offline for maintenance during months when demand dips and the state relies on natural gas and wind power. But the temps in Texas froze natural gas supply lines and stopped wind turbines from spinning. As of Wednesday, about 46,000 megawatts of power were still offline statewide. Anna, your take on the story?
We've been seeing lots of takes on this story. It's like a very convoluted and complicated situation that is making a lot of people look bad. I guess I didn't realize this until the ensuing coverage, but this actually happened once before and not that long ago, which, Texans probably remember this, but maybe nobody else does. In 2011, Texas experienced what the Houston Chronicle calls a, quote, near identical scenario, where a plunge in temperatures left 3 million people without power. And then at that time, the feds actually got involved and wrote a report warning ERCOT, which is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, that the state's power gen plants were not winterized in an adequate way to protect against this kind of freeze. And the report offered some guidelines on how to help prevent this in the future. But instead of mandating it, Texas regulators left it up to the power companies to either implement it or not. And the 2011 report actually cited the issuance of some of those same warnings after a similar event had occurred 22 years before that. Mm-hmm. So, this is probably what's making the blood boil of people. People like Ed Hers, who's an energy fellow at the University of Houston, who basically emphatically rejected the position of ERCOT, which was that this was unforeseeable. He called that nonsense. He called it not a surprise. Mm-hmm. So the big question is, does Texas learn from this? At this point, with climate change creating more risk in weather patterns, they may not have the luxury of kicking the can down the road on forcing these types of upgrades, as this kind of weather event could come much more frequently than like once every 10 or 20 years.
Right. We're already past the fool me once part of the story.
Right. Yeah.
To your point, these gas-fired plants and wind turbines can be winterized, and that 2011 report, they were advised on those changes, but they were voluntary and expensive. And I think it's also important to note that they did do some of those upgrades to the plants, and then they prevented a similar incident in 2018, but the weather this year was still much more extreme. Jeff, what were you thinking on this story?
We remember 2011 because the Packers were actually in the Super Bowl down there. They had the ice storms and stuff.
Yeah.
But when you first see the news coming out of Texas, it was kind of heartbreaking to see these people's homes just devastated by pipes bursting and things like that. And as I looked more into this, I just got more and more frustrated and upset because infrastructure appears to be one of those things that people like to talk about to get elected, but then actually doing it doesn't seem to help them get reelected. So they don't do it. We mentioned that all of these recommendations were made in 2011 when this happened the first time, and it's happened again. This is infrastructure investment, and this comes down to city, county, state officials doing their jobs to take care of people. Texas, as a GDP, is the 10th largest country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a typhoon hitting Bangladesh here. There is financial resources, there's engineering resources in place to make sure these things don't happen. And it's up to these local officials to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Infrastructure is one of those things in the U.S. where the whole system is broken. Our way of fixing things needs to be fixed because we're relying on local municipalities to do the right thing. They go to the federal government for funds. And if we use President Trump's $1 trillion Infrastructure and Reinvestment Act of a couple years ago, all of these municipalities stopped even trying to put in applications for grants because they were getting kicked back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether it's real or perceived that this was due to political reasons or whatever, it doesn't matter. You don't stop because something gets hard or it doesn't work. Again, this is Texas, and we don't have people able to get clean water.
Mm-hmm.
This is ridiculous to me. The fact that there's always a reactive dynamic to these types of infrastructure breakdowns is ridiculous. And I hate to be that guy who's just like, this is wrong, we need to fix it without a solution. But the solution is there, we just need to work harder at it.
Mm-hmm.
The money's there. As opposed to taxing FEMA to come in and fix everything, let's be proactive. We harp at our readers about preventative maintenance in their facilities.
Yeah.
Come on.
Because it has a direct impact on their bottom line, whereas these guys are just, they just want to be most popular in the next term.
Well,
And it also reminds me of the cybersecurity story that we did about the water plants last week, just in terms of this Band-Aid approach and kind of sucks to be in Texas, but Wisconsin's fine right now. So it kind of like removes you from actually the greater issue of infrastructure, failings.
And one final thing here, I just did a little bit of research. As a percentage of our GDP, the U.S. spends about 2.3% on infrastructure improvements annually.
Mm-hmm.
That's less than half of what they do in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Those countries have a tenth of our GDP, and they're spending twice as much on improving their infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, have to be better.
I would like to add that it's going to take more than regulatory changes as well, but it could also, a couple of community changes could have helped sort of lessen the blow in this in particular situation. The problem stems, from some anecdotal stories that I've heard coming out of the incident, which is once the power went down, some of these residents were cranking their thermostats up to like 80 degrees so they could get as much heat as possible when the power came back on, which caused much more demand in the grid and everything to crumble as soon as it popped back online. Is it too much, kind of to your point, is it too much of a pie in the sky sort of thought to think, we can do this on a regulatory level? And do you think it's too pie in the sky to think that a community can come together and just say, hey, if everyone keeps it at 60 and turns off their appliances, we should make it?
Oh, I think that that's reasonable to ask. I think that it wasn't clear to anyone. I think these residents, they didn't know that, my guess is that they were not planning to break the power grid with their actions, and that's to Jeff's point, like these are some really basic things, like to establish those kind of best practices and make sure that they are communicated to the communities and well written and easy to understand so people know. I mean, we've look back to like the World War II and there was all kinds of rationing of things and people like pulled together and did drives for whatever type of product that was needed. I mean, people can do this and they will do this. I just I don't think anybody knew what to do. That's my take, but
Well, and I think the mismanagement goes even further. I'm just going to keep bashing these guys because it really pissed me off, to be honest. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, there's people on the news talking about paying $1,500 a day to run their electricity and try to run some heat into their homes. What is that? Again, this is Texas, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's energy independence. That's what that is.
That's mismanagement at its highest level.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating, and our thoughts are definitely with the people in Texas, hoping that things get sorted out soon. All right, our fourth most popular story this week was actually a really cool story. A first look at the new Air Force One Flying Fortress. It's a cool opportunity. This week, the National Geographic Channel actually reached out to Jeff and offered a unique opportunity, a sneak peek at the show, the new Air Force One Flying Fortress. The program offers a brief history on the Air Force One fleet before delving into the process of replacing the pair of 30-year-old jets currently serving the country, the president and his staff. While the $5 billion price tag had skeptics, including Jeff, The show provided a look at the 30-year-old tech currently in service, and it definitely seems like it was time for an upgrade. Jeff, a little bit about this, the program and the story.
Yeah, I mean, I know for you and Anna to stay up till 9 o'clock with little kids is a daunting ask, but it was worth it if you had a chance. I mean, it was kind of a quick hour in terms of a program. I really enjoyed it anyway, but I think the biggest takeaways for me, I'm always skeptical of government spending. Okay, I'll be real open about that. But when you come in and you see these four guys cramped into like I don't know, a size similar to like an office cubicle, trying to fly the plane for the leader of the most powerful country in the world, it's a bit disconcerting. As well as the analog gauges that were on the wall and a lot of the 1990s-esque wood paneling and stuff throughout. So, I mean, just from the aesthetics alone, you could definitely see it was time for an upgrade. There was also some really interesting stories in the program. President Bush, after 9/11, not being able to connect with people because of the limited communications technology on board Air Force One at the time. Some of the other things, too, that they talked about, potential weapon systems and all that. It was a really interesting look, as well as just in the facility when they retrofitted these planes.
Yeah.
Where they basically had to figure out a way to take the weight off so they could do some work, but without bending, because it's a 350,000 pound fuselage.
Yeah.
So the engineering involved it was really cool to see these folks do this.
I got to say, I didn't get a chance to see it because you sent over the preview link, and it had expired. And not only did it expire, it like gave me this sassy message that's like, looks like you took too long. And I'm like, man, it was a recommendation. So I haven't seen it yet, but we're looking for it on our many apps that we have on our smart TV. One of them's got to have it. Anna, your thoughts on Air Force One?
You got sassed by Nat Geo. How does that feel?
It felt like a reprimand from a teacher. Just like, put on your dunce cap, sir.
Sit in the corner, David.
Yeah, that's such a thing that I
You're
had
in
to
detention
endure.
for being late.
They wrote your name on the chalkboard in the corner and under the thing that says "Do not erase."
I mean, if there's one thing I'm going to take heat on, it's typically punctuality and tardiness. So I'll own that.
I think this goes back to the geography issues that we had in the first episode.
Yeah.
A lot of baggage.
Is Air Force
with elementary school, I think.
Is Air Force One? Was Air Force One worked on in Spokane, Washington?
It was not.
Okay. Anna, any major issues that you saw with Air Force One? We did a lot of coverage with Trump's sort of negotiations early on in his administration.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think like so much has happened in the Trump presidency, including but not limited to obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, that it's almost hard to remember that the cost of Air Force One was a big point of contention at the beginning of his term. And he was very firm in his belief that the cost of Air Force One was way too high. And $5 billion does sound like a lot. But I think Jeff is on target when he points out that there's a lot of bells and whistles required here that you're not really thinking about, including that massive 350,000 pound fuselage that I think is that big because it needs to be able to they need to be able to stay in the air for like an indefinite amount of time. And that actually that can be refueled with an aerial tanker, but I think it goes like 14 or something hours before then, which is crazy.
Yeah, I didn't see the time. It's like 8,800 miles.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay.
But on the other hand, like some of the non-standard features that they have on Air Force One include the ability to withstand an electromagnetic pulse caused by a nuclear explosion, which I don't think they're like applying that to a standard aircraft. So I'm guessing that that's not cheap, but I don't know the numbers on that. Okay. But I do know that we got a decent deal on the planes themselves before the retrofitting started, and that's essentially because a now bankrupt Russian airline called TransAero had ordered 4 747-8s from Boeing back in 2013, but they never paid for them. So Boeing built the first two, and then they sort of cut their losses and wrapped the engines until they could find a buyer, which put the Air Force in a good position to negotiate. So they got like liquidation prices on whatever, like on an airplane. I don't know what, whatever that is on an airplane, like deals.
Right.
Deals.
Always looking for a bargain, even for the president.
Right.
So I noted that in August 2019, the Air Force the Air Force Ones were said to cost about $5.2 billion, like we talked about $2 billion more than the estimates from 2016. Boeing now will reportedly be paid $3.9 billion to build the jets, and the additional $1.3 billion is going to new hangars and other infrastructure costs. So one of the things I was curious about is, did we actually make a deal, or did we just stop talking about the $1.3 million that we put into infrastructure costs and hangars? Just like, and the other thing was, at the time, President Trump said that he, quote, added things. And, so the base sticker price for the two 747-800 aircraft would be around $700 million each, right? So that's about $1.4 million. So I was wondering, Jeff, did you see $2.5 billion in bells and whistles in there?
Well, 1 million feet of new cabling. Potentially, and this was hypothetical, and they talked about some of the other defense systems, like the shielding for the nuclear blast. That's real.
Yeah.
But they also talked about missile defense systems being embedded within Air Force One. Mm-hmm. So if Air Force One truly can shoot lasers out to take out incoming missiles,
yeah,
I think that's where a lot of it came from.
Oh, very good. One thing that I also want to add is a story that we covered recently about Hermes. Or Hermes. Basically, they're the company that won a contract in August this year to build a hypersonic Air Force One. And they've designed an engine capable of boosting the presidential jet to Mach 5. That's about 3,300 miles per hour, or 5 times the speed of sound. Now, the transatlantic trips with this new jet would take less than 2 hours. And they're going to have a demonstrator aircraft in 5 years, an actual plane in 10. So, 10 billion?
Still less than a trip, to the International Space Station. So
let's start charging Biden for the snack box. Maybe we can recoup some of our costs that way.
Right? To use the blankets and pillow. All right, on to our third story after addressing the huge, incredible construction sound from the room behind us. If you can hear that, sorry, there's nothing we can do. We spoke to them. They are unkind people.
They are building a model train back there with tack hammers, I think.
They essentially said, we're building a new suite for the second biggest company in Madison, maybe the largest company in Madison. So just no, just a general no. The third most popular story this week is Volkswagen, a victim in EV battery spat. 2 years ago, Volkswagen put up $800 million to expand one U.S. plant to produce electric vehicles. Now, a trade dispute is making things complicated. LG Energy Solutions said that fellow Korean competitor SK Innovation poached dozens of employees and stole trade secrets. A judge agreed, and SK was banned from importing, making, or selling batteries in the U.S. for 10 years. The problem is that SK has a $2.6 billion factory currently under construction in Georgia, and those batteries were earmarked for EVs from Ford and Volkswagen. The U.S. International Trade Commission upheld the decision, but with a 4-year exemption for Ford and only a 2-year exemption for VW. VW says that it is an unintended victim and hopes to at least get the same 4 years that Ford received. Anna, does VW deserve 4 years?
Well, I think if we want to support Volkswagen's efforts, then yes. I mean, so they call themselves a victim, and it sounds like sour grapes, but actually, this is a big deal for Volkswagen. Like, they're arguably one of the automakers that's had a bit of an advantage when it comes to electric vehicles. They tripled their EV sales in 2020. They launched 9 new electric and plug-in models at the same time, and Motor Authority pointed out earlier this year that Volkswagen sold about half the number of EVs that Tesla did in 2020, and that VW could, in fact, actually overtake Tesla in sales as soon as this year. So, it might look like another spat between a supplier and a customer, but this battery plant is actually a pretty big deal for Volkswagen, and they are pressing the gas on electrics, which is not the illustration I should have used. They're plugging in the electric extra hard into the outlet. And my point being that, VW has a ton of money wrapped up in electric vehicle development, $86 billion at last word over the next 5 years. And so losing a battery supplier and one that would supply their only U.S. EV plant would be a massive setback for them. And as VW has said, 2 years isn't enough to fix this problem, especially when there's a demand on both the raw materials involved and the finished product that comes with basically every automaker in the world making a run for electric at the exact same time and leaning heavily on the supply chain for those batteries.
Jeff, it sounds like, another week we're talking EVs and supply chain problems. Where do you stand?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Give them more time. I don't buy into the fact that they couldn't get something in place within 2 years, but I don't have a problem with that, primarily because it's not just about Volkswagen's supply chain. It's not just about their product offerings and getting stuff to market. It's about this plant in Tennessee that is primarily focused on producing electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at all of those jobs and that facility and all the effect they would have on the community even at larger, that's where my concern would go. I don't want somebody in Tennessee to be penalized because somebody in China doing something wrong.
Korea,
excuse me.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, but I think it's also a lesson that we continue to learn. I mean, a lot of it's been pandemic focused, but just in supply chain visibility and diversity. Coming out of the last recession, we worked with a lot of metal shops, metal fabricators, and they were absolutely done in by the fact that they were so reliant upon the automotive sector as their only customer in a lot of cases. They had to diversify. They had to go different areas. And I know we're talking about a different type of product here. It's a battery for an electric car.
Yeah.
But I still think for Volkswagen, this has to be a lesson learned in terms of diversifying, even pumping some money into some of these other suppliers, similar to Tesla and what they've done with Panasonic and another supplier as well overseas. So I think it's also a heads up at large. I mean, something like this can hopefully be kind of a case study for other automakers in terms of making sure there's other folks out there capable of supplying this vital component.
Yeah, you talk about the plants, about 1,000 jobs on the line, to make VW's ID4, the electric the electric compact SUV with a just terrible name in Tennessee. And VW and Ford want LG and SK to resolve their dispute out of court so that the battery supply chain doesn't take a hit. Do you guys think that's, wishful thinking that, they could figure out an agreement where SK could just license the technology?
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yeah, because we all want to share.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, everybody likes to share stuff.
Right.
It's a hot commodity right now, so they're competitive.
Well, the other thing is that Georgia, where SK's plant is, wants President Biden to step in and reverse the decision because another 2,600 jobs are on the line at SK's plant. Now, I mean, I remain skeptical of any sort of these job promises because I have family, my mother-in-law in particular, that lives just down the road from the Foxconn campus in Madison, also known as the ghost town where people get paid to do nothing. And I mean, it's just, so I'm skeptical, but at the same time, you like to see these states taking big swings and you want to try and make sure that everything is working. So that way, I guess it could have an amicable result for everybody.
Well, and I don't know the specifics around all of the employee poaching and the IP theft, stuff like that. But on the basis of just that, look, you can't get away with doing something wrong, okay? The court actually found that they were guilty of doing this, levied an appropriate sentence on them, so you can't just sweep that under the rug.
True.
But at the same time, there does need to be, I don't know if it's those two working together, or again, if it's the automakers looking at the supply chain and saying we need to also pump up some other potential suppliers, okay?
Yeah.
Maybe it's some conventional battery makers and helping them retrofit to produce batteries for EVs, things like that. But there's a lot of space in terms of industrial space out there. There's a lot of engineering prowess out there when it comes to electric vehicles. So following more of a Tesla model as opposed to some of the things that we've tried in the past from an automotive perspective, I think is a better route.
Yeah. You
can't force people to work together, and I don't think more government intervention is going to make something flow more smoothly.
No, that's a good point. You can't just expect them to come in and be like, play nice now. It'll be fine. Great, right? Our second most popular story is about a man of mystery as new details emerge on the Jetpack Mystery Man. Last August, pilots started seeing what appeared to be a man strapped to a jetpack speeding through the sky. Apparently, that's the noise that I make now. It was interesting, but the unidentified flying objects legitimately threatened incoming jets above LAX. Some thought that it was a stunt or misunderstanding, but the FBI launched an investigation, and the craft was spotted again in October. And in December, a pilot on a training flight finally caught it on video. According to declassified government documents, the quote Jetpack man might not actually be a man at all. Instead, we might be seeing a life-size mannequin that's being jetted around the heavens by a drone. Anna, what are we looking at here?
First of all, did you guys see any of this footage of that was captured of the jetpack?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's straight up Bigfoot Loch Ness monster footage, where it's like, I mean, maybe it's something.
It's so creepy.
It is creepy.
Yeah.
It creeped me out big time. And I mean, mannequins are creepy. We can all agree on that, I think.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on there? But I don't know. For me, like, when we thought this was a person, people, because this was kind of going on for months before this mannequin theory emerged, but people were really concerned that like a rational individual who had this kind of scientific brain, to pull this off would be so careless as to come so close to a flight path like they did over LAX.
Mm-hmm.
But even now that the human on a jetpack theory has been probably debunked, are we not concerned anymore? Because now we know, or we think we know, that this is some amateur piloting a drone who took it over LAX and elsewhere, like repeatedly getting dangerously close to commercial airplanes. So we talk a lot about the business case for drones, but the FAA and law enforcement as well are facing new challenges with their proliferation because they're so easy to get and they kind of open the door for criminal use, or in this case, maybe careless use. But they're having to come up with ways to police these crafts, like using a kind of like drone forensics, which is when you retrieve digital data from a drone that's been recovered. But as we're well aware, Jetpack Man is still on the lam. Probably hiding in plain sight in one of many department store windows. So if there's no drone to recover, then like how do you address these types of cases? Because the reality is like, it's felt like kind of a fluff story on the surface, but it really does raise some serious questions about the ability for these kind of drones to be tracked, and if our sophistication at this time is enough to prevent some serious misuse of the technology. And I think it's clear that we're not really there yet.
No, that was a point that was echoed by a lot of readers. There was one reader in particular, his name was David, who wrote to me to say, I was disappointed with the humor at the end of your story because of the threat to human life that this jetpack man posed when flying near LAX and other areas of high altitudes. Should the object hit an aircraft or be sucked into an engine, it could become a very serious accident. Making this into a light story only encourages this unlawful and dangerous behavior by people looking to get publicity and undermines the rules and regulations that we have in place.
Oof.
And to David, I just want to say, it was just a mannequin pun. But it was, but to that point, to actually talk about it seriously, Jeff, this is an inherent danger that comes with more flying objects in the sky.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this a little bit last week. We were talking about the taxis, to the airport and stuff like that, the flying cars. So yeah, it's exciting on one hand to see this technology evolving to maybe an individual level. I mean, the first thought that I had when I saw this was that scene out of the first Iron Man movie where he's cruising around and they're trying to figure out what he is and stuff. But yeah, I mean, to echo all of Anna's concerns from a safety perspective, it is alarming, especially over a major metropolitan area. Especially if this technology is that easily accessible. Provided it's not Elon Musk launching another company or something.
Right.
It's. I don't want to float any more conspiracy theories out there in terms of what this individual was doing or what this jetpack was. But again, the FAA, even maybe some sort of radar tracking capability specifically designed for these types of the size of these types of objects would help just police them a little bit more and being able to understand where they're coming from, where they're landing, all that kind of thing.
Well, and I think part of that is that the drone technology came first, and now we're getting tracking and, other technology that can kind of get these drones out of the sky without necessarily firing projectiles at them, but it's still just not there. Where like there was the one sort of cannon that recovered that will shoot it down by basically cutting all communications to it, and then it'll drop out of the sky. But it's still just not there yet.
Well, if heaven forbid there's an actual person attached to this, I mean, that isn't probably the best approach.
Well, on the topic of a person being attached to it, I think this has to be a mannequin on a drone. Because if you think of the inventor Richard Browning from Gravity Industries, he's the guy that created that dataless jet suit, which drew Iron Man comparisons, long after the Stark envy had kind of faded. The jet suit has 5 gas turbine engines, 2 mounted on each arm and 1 on the back. It has 5 kerosene-fueled turbine engines and produces more than 1,000 horsepower. Now, this beautiful, sophisticated jetpack still only flies for 4 minutes, and for a guy that's been flying this thing for years, it still looks pretty touch and go when he's up there. Like there have been plenty of times when I've seen him try and land, on the stand before the people, and he just doesn't make it. He just falls. But this thing can fly up to 12,000 feet. So it is possible that Jetpack Man sightings, which were seen at 3,000 and 6,000 feet respectively, is possible. But again, my point on the Bigfoot footage, the pilot, on the Instagram post or whatever social media it was, put the text right over where the flight path of this object. And it's just like, it's kind of like, oh, there's Bigfoot. And all of a sudden I'm really shaky, This is the Loch Ness Monster. And it's just like, even though I have a state-of-the-art camera in my pocket, it's just so out of focus. Anyway, it is possible, but given some of the people that have tried to make jetpacks in the past and seeing how they work, I just don't think that's a person up there.
Yeah,
I think they have a propensity for like exploding also. So
yeah,
if this was a person, they would be an interesting person
right.
to try this.
Yeah, if it is a person, I owe you an apology.
Well, the thing that was kind of unique is, look, whatever the footage was, real or not, there was controlled movement, which is not what you've seen in some of these other sort of inventions or whatever. It was that individual was moving, and they definitely had a direction that they wanted to go in and were able to maintain that. So if that's actually real, that's pretty innovative for this, but also, again, super scary.
It definitely had to be the straight line UAV, not a quadcopter or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, the most popular story on our sites this week, which is just not surprising, is the story, Jeff, you wrote this week about Russia making shotguns for hipsters. And it wasn't just shotguns. State-owned military supplier Rostec is reportedly building a combat suit capable of stopping 50 caliber bullets. The rounds are typically fired by an M2 automatic machine gun that is on a tripod or vehicle mounted. The 5-inch bullets are the one thing that most high-end bulletproof armor still can't stop. But Rostec's Centurion armor will be able to withstand a direct shot, reportedly. The same week, Kalashnikov, the maker of the AK-47, is said it is making a gadget gun for hipsters. It's a semi-automatic 12-gauge shotgun with a compass, a video camera, and computerized firing instructions. It doesn't say whether or not it pairs with social media. The MP-155 Ultima will cost around the equivalent of about $1,300. And I want to say, reader, email in the podcast, Douglas wrote, I will be so disappointed if the Russian body armor doesn't make the broadcast next week. So, Douglas, this is for you. Jeff, what do you got for Doug?
Well, starting with the body armor. I was going to bring this in because I still have one from my training days in the Army. But a 50 caliber round, basically if you go from the base of the palm of your hand to the tip of your longest finger, that's a 50 cal round.
Oof.
Yeah.
Okay. So think about that being deflected by body armor.
Yeah.
Okay. Unless Rostec has like a Wakandan mine of vibranium, they're making a bunch of superhero shields like Captain America's or something. I don't really see this, which is why pretty much everybody in the defense field just kind of rolled their eyes at this one. Like, no, you're not stopping a 50 cal bullet. It's just not going to happen. So that was interesting, but this is sort of the Russian military's thing. Like, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but they throw out enough of these crazy ideas where you're like, if you can't not believe them, because if you start doing that, then they're going to surprise you. So you have to kind of pay attention to it, but you don't want to totally buy in until you see something. So that one seems kind of out there. When we look at Kalashnikov and making this, I can't believe they would call a 12-gauge shotgun a gadget gun, but that is their term. So
something for the kids.
That's their call. On one hand, if you look at it from a business perspective, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, look, we think we've basically got our guns with everybody who knows how to fire one. here's a market that we haven't tapped into. The people who don't know how to shoot a gun. So we'll put all these gadgets on there, this computerized stuff that'll make it more appealing to them. So, I mean, okay, that's interesting. You're going for an untapped market, and you are trying to actually show them how to safely use the firearm as opposed to just giving it to them like a new toy. So again, it's just like such a Russian way of putting something like that out there. Like, hey, it's fun. It's cool.
Yeah.
Take a shotgun.
Everybody's
Here we
doing
go.
it. Yeah.
Relax.
Regarding that body armor, I want to echo your point. Like, could a person actually withstand that shot? Because according to one of our readers, that actually goes by the name Straight Shooter on the sites. Thanks, Mark. He has a ballistic table that says a 50 caliber Browning machine gun firing a 750 gram projectile, which will hit you at 2,820 feet per second. Now that is quite an impulse to absorb.
Well, yeah, and I mean, from my personal experience in shooting one, it's not a trigger.
Yeah,
You sit behind it, and you've got two forks that you hold on to, and you push it down with two of your thumbs. That's how you fire things. I mean, it's fun. It's pretty amazing. But I mean, it's stupid powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's mounted on a Humvee or a self-propelled howitzer, like I learned on. So, yeah, this is it's gonna like deflect a 50 cal bullet. I mean, yeah, that's why people just aren't taking this one too seriously.
Anna, your thoughts on the Hipster gun?
Yeah, I know like literally zero about firearms, so forgive anything I'm about to say.
But if there was a compass on one, are you suddenly in the market?
Yeah, I don't.
You could watch a YouTube video while you're shooting it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Jeff's points about new market development, that was my first thought, because they keep referring to like how this gun is for hipsters, and like, to me, I don't know, like, do hipsters carry guns? Like, all the hipsters I know carry like kombucha and wireless headphones. Like, they don't like.
If hipster is going to carry a gun, would it need to be like a musket or something like super
Oh,
ironic?
yeah.
I mean,
well, and
the
the ironic part of this is, oh, good, thanks.
Yeah, no,
Thanks.
they're back.
Just keep building.
Tell us about the irony, Anna.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, so it was funny to me that it looks like the Duck Hunt gun from the original Nintendo.
Really?
Like, if you look at the picture of it, it's like it's got sort of like these flashy neon sides. It's long and gray and looks plastic. I don't know. So maybe that's how you target that group, but I don't know. The designer was quoted in the Moscow Times indicating that this gun would be a good way to involve the next generation in hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. Like Jeff pointed out that the gun has a program that helps teach users how to shoot, but he goes on to say that he wants people to own weapons responsibly and at the same time get a kick out of it. So I guess that's one way.
yeah.
Anyway, in case anyone's interested, I looked up the average age of a rifle hunter in the U.S., and that is 43, which seems old for caring about how cool your gun looks, or if it can like play vinyl records or whatever hipsters are doing.
Well,
I don't know.
It is. I mean, that's a real problem where there's just a severely declining interest in hunting. Especially being in Wisconsin, we're hearing about that a lot. The people that are still hunting, great, more land for them to hunt, but overall interest is dwindling. Also, on the point of the hipster gun, like, I guess I don't know who it's going to influence other than people that have an empty spot in their safe already. A gun enthusiast sees something like this and they're like, I need it. But what has pushed some of the hipster friends that I have into buying guns was the pandemic. Like, friends that I have that I would never think would own a gun now talk openly about, owning firearms. And I think that if anything pushed them into that, it was the current situation. They didn't
To shoot
need
the virus?
Huh?
To shoot the virus?
Yeah, well, no, it was basically like they don't need bells and whistles. They just watched Contagion a lot last March and started arming up. And it's crazy, but I had a neighbor, we are kind of similarly aligned on gun ownership, or we were. And then like a few months later, he's like, oh yeah, let it come, because we're ready. I'm just like, what's going on? He's like, oh, I got a safe now. Just like, interesting, man. So I think I think that it's not going to be the type of gun that pushes people into gun ownership. I think it is going to be situational, and we're living among that situation right now where, gun ownership is going up. And I think they've even had problems keeping them on the shelves, stocking ammunition, stuff like that, just because of the fear, that's sort of surrounded this entire situation, especially at the onset of it.
Well, one thing, $1,300 is not cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a cheap shotgun. So
that's a lot of gigs. Sorry. I worked a lot of gigs to get this new rifle or shotgun.
So that's the other thing. I mean, if that's your first exposure to a firearm, I mean, that's an investment. So.
Right. Well, now we move on to the next segment. In case you missed it, and I want to go first because I feel like my story is the weakest out of the three, so I want to end a little stronger.
Whatever we can do to make you feel better, David.
Oh, it's going to take more than a hug, Jeff. The story this week is cannabis is creating jobs faster than any other American industry. Basically, the 5th annual Cannabis Industry Jobs Report came out this week, and it's prepared by Leafly. The report says that the cannabis industry now supports 321,000 full-time U.S. jobs. That's just in 37 states with legal, medical, or adult use markets. The industry added 77,000 jobs in 2020, a 32% increase in year-over-year growth despite the pandemic. Cannabis is creating jobs now at a faster rate than any other industry. Now, when you think about 321,000 jobs, I understand that's not huge. Boeing and its subsidiaries alone have 143,000 employees. GM has 155,000 in 2020, and General Electric had 174,000. So it's not huge yet, but as the construction continues in the background, I want to say the opportunity of legal cannabis, as long as the trajectory towards legalization remains on course, is undeniable. Anna, what did we miss this week?
One story that I thought was pretty interesting that kind of, I think, flew under the radar a little bit is that Jaguar, as they say in the commercial.
Yeah.
David, you're the pronunciation authority.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe it is Jaguar.
Yeah.
When you're
Thanks,
driving
David.
a Jaguar.
That's like Mark Strong, James Bond type stuff there.
Anyway, whatever this company is called, they announced that they're going fully electric by 2025, which is interesting, I thought, because Jaguar Land Rover is really the first automaker to make a super firm commitment to electrification on such a short time frame. Most automakers are investing big, as we know, but we're definitely not seeing many of them commit exclusively to the technology, and those who are, like GM and Bentley, have much longer timelines to achieve that designation. So in GM's case, they said that they'll phase out diesel and gas by 2035, so a full 10 years behind what Jaguar said they're doing. But of course, GM has a much bigger portfolio to consider. But Jaguar Land Rover's business unit is also committing to electric, so Land Rover as a separate part, right? But and that's on a more staggered timeline, consistent with what other automakers are doing. But Motor Trend says that Jaguar was essentially, quote, swatting a paw at Tesla. But it's also worth noting, I think, that the premium brand has been struggling in recent years. So the alternate theory is maybe like, why not? Go big or go home, Maybe it's a Hail Mary, but I like it. Jaguar has always kind of been known for its like weird, almost commitment to quality. Like I once read that the valets that load the freshly finished vehicles onto the trains for transit, like they're not allowed to wear belts or buckles or even have like metal eyelets on their shoes to make sure that they don't scratch anything. So if Jaguar can bring this kind of attention to detail to new electric line, then maybe they can take on Tesla.
Jeff, your thoughts on an electric Jaguar, the cannabis industry, or let's just jump into your story, whatever your pleasure.
Well, I think the cannabis thing is interesting. I mean, that is great job growth. What I think is going to be interesting to see where those jobs end up being. If I had to guess, I'm going to say a lot of them right now are retail, which great.
Yeah.
But if that can filter then into more production type jobs, higher paying type of jobs, I think that's going to be an even greater boon. And as far as with Jaguar, I think this is interesting because I think it gives them more of a category. It gives them a more of a competitive category to be in. I think, they can talk about swatting a pod, Tesla, but I think really what they should be doing is trying to compete with Mercedes in a lot of electronic vehicles that they're coming out with, and trying to sort of jump on that train. But I thought one of the cool things that caught my eye this week was affordable robots potentially making their way into the police force, because the first thing I thought about was the iconic action film RoboCop. I mean, who wasn't a fan of Officer Murphy?
Oh yeah, I just watched it recently.
Yeah. I mean, it did get a little off key down to I think there's 4 of them. So it even spawned TV.
It
got kind of bad, but I mean, in all seriousness, I think this is a great concept if they can make these affordable in terms of going into dangerous areas. Very similar to when we look at drones and things in a military environment. If we can help support our police force by sending in, whether it's violent situations, hostage situations, whatever the case may be, even if it's just a dangerous environment with some known bad actors, I think it's a positive thing. Anything we can do to keep law enforcement safe and reduce their exposure to some dangerous environments is a positive thing. So I thought this was kind of a cool story to see. Now they're not going to put a gun on his hip or anything like that. Yeah. So this would be more about talking people down and assessing the situation more than anything else. But still, I thought it was a cool story in a positive direction for the technology.
I thought it was cool as well because it definitely seemed like it was going to be taking more of an observe and report sort of task or role. And most recently, what we saw with a lot of the riots is that it was with the riots that we saw, particularly in Madison and Milwaukee, is that there was sort of a keep it contained, make sure it doesn't escalate, and then use all the footage to prosecute all the instigators. And I thought something like this, which just provides that much more audio and video that they use to sort of unwrap the situation and prosecute people going forward. That was just my sort of thought when I read it. Finally, jumping into final thoughts. Anna, other than the noise that is so loud out here, I can't imagine you can hear anything in there. What are your final thoughts for this episode?
I don't have any final thoughts outside of what the noise is. It's someone is hammering into my brain, and I can't move on from it.
It sounds like they are just on the other side of your wall.
Just jackhammering at my feet.
Yeah.
David, I think we should offer our readers the opportunity to voice their thoughts on what could be creating this noise.
Oh, yeah.
And in exchange for the best conspiracy theory, we offer them a free Old Grease t-shirt or something.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, I got a pile of softball t-shirts. And, man, actually, we got drawers of IEN t-shirts. So send us anything you got cooking, and we'll get those out to you. Doug, send us your address. My final thought is, just again, the housekeeping that everybody hates to hear. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. And if you want to email those zany theories to us, email us at Jeff, Anna, or David at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. Again, questions and comments, not pitches. I understand the PR profession, but my goodness.
One last shout out. We rag on NASA a lot for some of the stuff, but kudos to them, right?
Oh, man.
Perseverance landed, no problems. Should be already some cool images coming back from that. So maybe we talk a little bit about that next week, too.
I think so. I just like being reinvigorated by the space industry because I find it exciting.
Yeah.
Are you ragging on NASA?
I have been critical of NASA once or twice.
Right? The guy who has on 3 different occasions mentioned overblown government spending. Maybe he has something to say about the outfit.
Somebody didn't go to space camp, and it shows.
Right. All right. Well, thank you all for your time today. For Jeff, for Anna, I'm David Manti, and this has been the Today in Manufacturing podcast. We'll catch you next week.